So that brings us to our current community education when it comes to promoting fiber-rich diet and foods. And this is something that you're probably all familiar with, especially if you're working in community education. You know, we know My Plate and USDA's initiative that encourages Americans to eat balanced diet, which includes fiber-rich foods with fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. SNAP-Ed and AFNAP programs, which are supplemental nutrition assistance programs that are serving low-income individuals, also follows the same guidelines and promotes those fiber-rich foods into meals through various different education methods like cooking demonstrations, budget planning, meal planning, grocery shopping tips, and more. There's also programs that target older adults like Eat Smart, Live Strong that are promoting, again, the same things. Then we have organizations that are focusing pregnant women and new mothers and young children that are also emphasizing this through whole grains and fresh produce. And there's various other programs like Let's Move, Whole Grain Council, and American Heart Association that are pushing this out even at smaller campaigns or larger campaigns that encourage grains and high fiber foods. One thing we can't forget here is that one-on-one education and counseling that we receive at our doctor's offices from nutritionists, dietitians, through medical nutrition therapy, and all promoting, right, and suggesting grain and fiber recommendations. So why are we still making these choices, right? We all know the health implications. However, we step in a grocery store and buy these foods that are promoting our health a little bit less. One thing that we think a lot about within our Nebraska Extension work is how to reach underserved audience, how to reach minority population. And this picture really kind of gives you a snapshot of what those communities look like. Lincoln especially is a hub for immigrants. You know, we're serving a wide variety of immigrants. And when it comes to food, grocery shopping, and also other health implications, the picture I included is a class on hypertension, which I think that's your sister in the picture. Is that right? Yes. Yeah, so our community is connected, and we're trying to reach everyone. And this is also something we want to think about today. You know, how do we make this nutrition education around fiber and wheat culturally responsive as well, that we can reach everyone? So another thing to think about is what we already heard about it today, is the rise of those influencers, right? With wide reach, with great platforms that might not be spreading out such good scientific information that we're trying to do. So that information on social media is easily accessible and it lacks scientific evidence. So how do we also think about that as we're thinking about what Coalition for Grain Fiber is trying to achieve here? So a lot of common misconceptions that come out of, especially when we think about grains, as, you know, carbohydrates are poison, grains are not good for you, gluten is gonna kill you. All those things that you see out there is something that's setting us back with all the great education that we're trying to do. And then consequences from that misinformation is not only affecting health, it leads to those unbalanced diets, unwanted dietary restrictions, and then educating our children on those unwanted dietary restrictions that are not going to help us in the long run. So not a great choice of color today, but basically, what is next? This is where you come in, and this is where we want to have rich, meaningful conversation around our tables. So I would propose maybe 10 minutes conversation on this that I'm going to read for you because it's hard to read. And then we maybe want to share out about 10, 15 minutes on what we come up with. So how can we enhance community education about dietary fibers' roles in helping to reduce, prevent, and manage chronic disease, including diabetes, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and obesity. So we're thinking about current community education and how that can be enhanced. And then we're going to take that step further with what the Coalition for Great Fiber is trying to achieve. So this is going to be a first step, about 10 minutes. Please, you can start your conversation on in the Zoom room. How many do we have?
We have 4.
Yes, so if they can just type in, and then we'll read that out loud. Thank you.
They want to do education out in these areas, and we think that if it's a food desert, you can go on the case education you want, because they don't have access to what you actually. And so we approach to the medical. Look, this is a and then training early, because there are other studies that show that you can change it, stop and go, put in the pressure and they don't sell because the buying habits are already. So get it there early, but we have to change right.
Short of with Grace, our push right now is everybody's freeze-dried has been working on guides that we can use for the public, like how to do things. The same thing with gut health and research. How can we take that and actually as a social media?
Environment like today, I love it.
You know, the Kardashians in the world are much more talking about nutrition.
There's a lot of knowledge.
I have biological background.
Well, you don't have your chance to do all the get so but it's so taxes and most of the stuff so there's maybe one like only a few other people
But I did not know like where it's going to go. I think they just think that. So I would say. They're not as zero. If you don't like strawberry,
To establish.
it's not always necessarily you're going to sit there seeing it. It's pretty common.
A lot of choices. Community based, but it is Oh, I've been thinking about. Adult behavior, a lot of behavior is there's a group that comes together. And they hold each other accountable. They share information, they share stats. So think about it. So,
They're like, oh, this video got it.
because some of the populations are really, we think of, man, alone, they really come together, so people can train and change the diet, they have to change it anyway. Like, so how do we really do whatever it is, and I think back to some international work.
I like now you're anti corporate. That's what I was saying.
Not the expert, where you, it's how peer, how it's peer to
Get it around.
I guess the donut.
I mean, I don't want to, but I mean, I didn't, I'm sure, no donuts today. We all ate them, we all ate chicken. That's how behavior a lot of times is treated, like we're watching.
I don't care if they're.
It is.
We're not on social media platform, we're trying to change families, early starting with that change that behavior for having kids. You know, what you start to be and I think it's gonna social media. Almost community, they can't do what
The bigger the mess, the more fun. Which I think we're But I had elementary kids that were crying.
And I'm watching about the thing of, yeah, my mom was at the founding member of the Abbey. And I remember that was and they actually instituted change in management. We can feel what are very, or we want to be alone. Share and with what we have, it's almost all. We can have it. Well, and that's true. However, I just read an article yesterday. Even though that's changing, but deep down, they want face to face.
It's like, oh, we're on a weekend. No, I'm like, you're not on the diet, your mom is on the diet.
Your education.
We all.
Now
I'm seeing.
I mean, with the fear
Yes,
that hasn't changed.
and then that's like research on keto. So that's what I say, but I think the whole issue is extremely. And like I tell everybody, over and over and over. And your mom will see that they buy less plastic because it fills up the family.
Great, so then can we do something based on how
Required flavor.
if we can't get them in the bowl anymore, we can't get them here. Think about workplace. Where's the education in the social media?
Like I didn't believe I go to like Facebook likes and post people in survey, survey.
Is that in
People
short?
aren't like social media feed. Most people will ask their doctor about what they saw there. There's an information source that social media feed. We're just like, we have new strategies that should incorporate social media. This is a plant-based. And also, so there's a role in that. I'm on social media, so I like social media. I prefer to work with. I'm good at work with. So he's my son. So he's doing studies. These guys tell us how to do it. These guys are the right shooting stars.
So I also think we can also help
The whole commodity of wheat is. Yeah, we can easily find ourselves. Right on the counter. Right when I see just like that.
And fighting is hard for themselves. Re-measure fiber in my lab. You can also, find your parents with nice little circuit, the length of box. Encourage.
And there's no correlation.
And also, you can also encourage consumption in places like the French.
No entrances in.
What's not as good and and also can also increase information using print media like storybooks. Help children learn about funny material. Just to as a
That medical side. So it's working on it.
Yeah, so I like what you just say about symptoms on social media. I think that's great, but I also think a better way of translating it papers. Because you can give one of those papers. So I think there's some.
Yeah, it's like.
I know. Do a good job with translating these research. So pretty big. But I did want to say, I think.
Well, that's obviously.
I think that's just the reality.
There's a big price difference there. And then when you see that.
Good talk is proven there.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
By the time that I get.
so one thing that
And
who do people look up to?
then you have the flipper thing that you gotta.
They want to be professional athletes. They want to be movie stars. They want to be whatever, right? And I was talking to a athletic director at one of the universities, and talking about the rise of travel teams. People are so focused on getting their children into the big leagues and the sports, but they're taking children out of school, out of high school, and plays. And
So in
thinking
your
about
home,
that,
doesn't just.
I remember Michael Jordan talked about his diet when he played for the Chicago Bulls. It was not, right? And so, and having had time to think about this, we're thinking about this. Should we be looking at really trying to survive traveling? You want to be a superstar? Then this is the diet you need to have. You need to start this at 8 and 9 years. Because they're the influencers. And so think about if we can find like a Michael Jordan. Right, so are we going after that segment of whatever, because if they're putting out schools. And then where are the challenges? How do we use that? Because they want to have, and then using that, so if they're doing it well, right, be like, right, that was a whole. Be like,
That's why I thought it was only kids that I don't want to be part of
Oh, it is, it's terrible out of So you didn't do the hockey thing in Texas?
I'm just saying, that's what. People have sense with them, listen to that message. I think it's before. As an example, I can look at, you can back in the school for right. Here's it.
Access to.
People see each other, it's like, it's relatively common. You're kind of the same friends.
I just know from the university I came from, the nutrition specialists did power up. Because then the athletes influence. This is the type of diet I'm on, the influence of children. See what from the community, whatever.
Okay, so then you take every sort of and you put something.
These gals, you know, I think that just realized she was me, and I have to.
Look, you're getting out there doing live or whatever like that.
Why don't you share? Yes.
And that's new territory, right? I mean, let's face it, we're not the TikTok influencers at the moment.
We're gonna retop the conversation in 2 minutes.
It's like, and you know, most of the students aren't even in Texas, so more best percent on the line. Unfortunately, that's where message out there, especially gonna try to target. They can actually test it for, you know, I should tell me that. I'm doing some minus.
You know, oh my God. You know, you're looking at it, I mean, it's a side there, but then that's not. That's what I tell elementary child, then it's so far reaching.
You can target your advertising, the demographic age, their search engine. No, that's what I'm doing. And this is Google Ads, but that's different. It's, but the challenge is this, I'm not gonna go to that. I'm not going to, but. I don't believe in social media stuff for being effective. It's like, that's the way it works. I mean, that's how we get people.
All right, thank you. We appreciate your conversation. I know everybody quiet down real nice.
Hello, can you hear me?
Huh?
Can you hear me?
Well, okay, well, you know, she had a way with words, we'll put it that way. Yeah, she was a likable woman, yeah. All right.
Dr. Jones, can you hear me?
That conversation we'll have later. Okay, we would like for you to share out your conversations, what you had at your table. We did hear you, so we know there are things that you have to tell us now. Okay, would you like to start? You did have a conversation.
One thing to share is really just the struggle to have consumer adoption of increasing fiber. Like we know there's tremendous amount of research on the benefits of fiber. They're well characterized. And really to the point now that different types of fibers, even subgroups of fibers, we know the benefits of, but getting consumers to purchase those products and to consume them regularly, there's a challenge. And how to overcome that barrier, I don't know if we really have answers yet, other than some concepts around stealth health-based approaches.
Well, that's what I say, I don't know what we talked about, and I even said who's taking notes. But you know, the thing that I brought up, and I don't know how to articulate it correctly, but with his research, the most innate thing that you can point out to somebody of why you want to increase fiber is the whole B word, which I do say to elementary children when I go in there, and if you're not pooping, you're not healthy. And I can get the kids to pay attention to me, but it's reality and that's the facts. And that's what he brought up, and but that's not the only thing that fiber's doing. But for our young people, the other effects that fiber does way down the line in terms of disparities is too far reaching in reality. So figuring out how you create reality for why you want to increase fiber. And then Kristen, I think your idea should be shared aloud that you brought up. And somebody else can chime in too, but yeah.
I just posed the question when you're talking about community education. There's a lot of federal programs that are already disseminating the information, but in combating the health influencer information, maybe there's a potential to work with, you know, the university systems around marketing and communication. They already have students that are looking for capstone projects and are really well-versed in different communication channels. And it could be a potential partnership between, I said, Devin with his research that he already has done, and taking that and moving it forward into how do we properly communicate this with the public, potentially through NDE or DHHS to our population that we are working with.
Yeah, you did it. Excellent. Just thanks.
Motivate Charlie.
Now I have to have Jean Ann's notes. One of the things there are a number of things you talked about, and it's no simple answer, as everybody knows. There's no simple answer. For instance, if you have a food desert, does it really help us to do education that you should do this when you don't even have access to what you need? So that's one issue. And then how do we communicate at what different ages of life? We discussed that a lot of our habits are formed in those, single digit years of our lives, and they last a long time. And so one is, how do you influence adult behavior? How do you change that? But then the other is, how do you influence them in those single digit years, right? And we can be in the schools, but these things have incredible influence on young people's lives, incredible. And so then thinking of this as a medium, again, then what influences them, right? What influence, just to see this, what is it? Do they listen to their peers? Do they listen to someone who's that they look up to? Do they listen to someone who's outrageous, right? These are the really difficult things to think about, how we do this. But I think the agreement is we have to start somewhere, but we can't hang our hat just on education. I mean, we can do that all day long. We've shown that doesn't, it's so much multifactorial to really get this.
It's interesting that all four tables have used the word influencer, because we had a heavy conversation about the next step to touch those kids in elementary school, middle school, high school, young adult years, and even maybe those of us that have more wisdom. My preference to age is wisdom, are to find influencers in the social media space that will give positive messaging versus what we have seen with glutens and GMOs and other things in the social media space. It's easier said than done because most influencers are paid. And it's a very lucrative business to be a scaremonger. And we also have the reality of language barriers, socioeconomic barriers, food desert barriers, and the like, coupled with the research that we have speaks at a very high intellectual level. And the average Nebraskan reads at a 5th grade level. So how do we bring our messaging into a space through vehicles that are heard in a way that people can read and listen? Not an easy task, but our table had confidence that the brilliance in this room, we're going to all solve it tomorrow. And we're going to begin implementing it with the influence to make change happen.
Okay, thank you. We also have people on Zoom.
We have 2.
Wonderful. I will read those responses. Thank you so much for those on Zoom that are participating in this discussion. All right, so Claudia Carter said, we discussed that education is more about practical solutions that we can offer to people. We talked that we should not assume people know and understand about whole grains or fiber. Yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you, Claudia. And Steve Greenspan said, we also talked about the importance of having educational materials in schools that stress the value of whole grains in addition to fruits and vegetables. And we talked about the opportunity of working with social media influencers, including those that don't currently focus on diet. Yeah, wonderful points. And it's really interesting to see how that social media space keeps coming up. And that's definitely something we need to keep in mind for these next steps.
I get to do both? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So I got my cheat sheets here. All right, we're gonna move on to the next slide. We're gonna talk, part of the goal for the Coalition for Grain Fiber is to enroll wheat, which is apparently the world's favorite food, in the fight against disease. And for some people, this is a new idea of food as medicine. And for some, yes, it is a new area. We're gonna talk about the increase in fiber in white flour, which we don't think about often. We often think about white flour as being something that's refined and minus the fiber. And also whole wheat benefits to all socioeconomic groups with no change in consumer behavior. The part of the discussion that we had when we first started this program was that if we are going to do this, it has to be available to all people. Oftentimes, these are not necessarily foods that are going to be in communities of color. They're not going to be in low-income neighborhoods. We're not going to be the ones who are going to purchase them. And if you go to the grocery store, the whole wheat breads are much more expensive. So what are you going to do if you are low income and you cannot afford some of these things? You move slides on me. Gee, thank you. One of this is the community perception of food and health technology. What if a consumer who can afford a $20 local bread actually is the one who takes it away from a low-income neighborhood? All community, particularly farmers, have questions about what more can they do for us as a society without their concern. One of the issues within communities of color is, and marginalized communities, is we have been used periodically for various things. And the one that they've chosen here is the Tuskegee syphilis study. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Tuskegee. Okay. Tuskegee was, this is Tuskegee, Alabama, and this actually was conducted by U.S. Department of Public Health Service from 1932 to 1972, which isn't that long ago. So we have not built that trust in marginalized communities. If you look at Native Americans, there's the Trail of Tears. There, pretty much every community of color has some story they can tell you. Also, that's the last one. Negative perceptions of gluten and wheat. And this one says many of socioeconomic groups. I think all of us in here have a friend who does not eat gluten because they're allergic to gluten. But anyway, that's one of my own pet peeves. And no, I'm not allergic to gluten, so I'm fine. Okay. Part of this goal is how do we tackle this with with wheat? So what is it that we think? So we are going to do. You on the next slide. Okay. It is time for you to do another table discussion. This is where you get to participate again. I'm going to read from this direction because my slide doesn't, I'm sorry if you can't see. Okay. We're going to talk about impact for education. What is it we can do to positively impact consumer behavior? Behavior retail strategies that support consumer selections. What is it we can do to help consumers buy healthier foods? And to build support for the Coalition for Grain Fiber while reducing barriers to purchasing food. And the last one is to respond to emerging shifts in consumer perceptions in diet that result from our activities. Consumer perception seems to change daily, if you ask me. That's my opinion only. All right, this is your table discussion. You bet.
I just wanted to add something.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah. Kind of the main thing for this part of the discussion, since we're already talked about what can we do better with educating individuals on grain and fiber, but how does this change when better wheat is introduced and we have white products now that are also healthy? So do we need to change our education? Does it stay the same because now any choice is a healthy choice, right? So those are some of the things that we want to for you to think about, as well as once this fiber is grown, it's put into production, there's bread on the shelf. How do we tell people about it? How do we find out how do we anticipate what the community's feedback might be on this? So this is going to be next step with Coalition for Grain Fiber, thinking about these steps before obviously they happen. So this is something that we're asking you to help us think about in this next 10 minutes. Again, we'll do 10 minutes table and then a share out. Yes. Yeah, I think for the Zoom, it might help.
Before we go to the discussion, is it fair to ask the question, what led you to form this coalition? Because we have this issue with the fiber consumption and the whole grain over 20 years. So what are the factors that contributed to forming this coalition? So that will help us at least to identify the next steps and even help us with a discussion.
Yes, thank you for that question. I don't have a wonderful answer since I'm not the one that formed the coalition. We're here to lead the discussion on community efforts, but I believe this was started to have better food for better health.
I think part of the coalition is that it seems like there's the ag people over here that's having the discussion, and there's the dietetic nutrition food science over here. I think the coalition was the nice idea to bring them both together. So I think, how do we collaborate at this point? How do we not work in silos? Okay.
Yeah, I can speak some to the issue of how we were founded. If you can hear me, okay?
This is just a big room discussion that works too, and then Zoom can share.
I can address that as one of the first scientists on the coalition, and Devin can add too, because we were on that same meeting with Rod, where he's talking about, hey, you guys are wheat researchers. I'm a breeder. Devin is on the food science side, the microbiome side. You know, we know we can do this. We know that there is variation. This was actually demonstrated 10 years ago in the UK in UK wheat that we can do high fiber wheat. But how much wheat does the UK produce that feeds the world? Not that much. We can have a much larger impact here in the US with high fiber wheat. Our wheat is marketed as some of the highest quality wheat in the world. And so we have customers all around the world. That being said, we really started with just scientists on board, but scientists, especially, plant breeders, are not maybe the best messengers to get this out. We can breed the wheat, we can get it out there, but how do we get it into the marketplace so that it's successful. There's lots of history of plant breeding efforts that didn't pan out or were successful, but couldn't continue in the marketplace. And so I think that's your comment that we had the ag side, which is very true. We're rolling the ball on the ag side, but we need to keep it going. And that's why we really want to see the Coalition for Grain Fiber expand, so that we can be successfully deploy high fiber products, not just wheat products. Hopefully in the future, we're more than just a wheat community. Brett or Devin?
Yeah. Well stated. And I come at this, I guess, from the outside. I was pursuing high fiber wheat before this coalition concept even came to be. And you know, I just got into it because personal reasons. I just feel like, hey, we need to do something for wheat. This is after 2011. And I was involved in a lot of messaging on behalf of the Wheat Foods Council when the Wheat Belly book came out. And my gosh, what a nightmare that was to not just counter the messages that were being stated, but we didn't even have the research to counter. All we could do is just say what we thought. We didn't even have the research. So we're in a lot better position now, 10 years later. But something else comes to mind, and that is Australia. You got to hand it to those people. They were the first ones to come out with high amylose wheat. This would have been 20 years ago, I think. Here we are, you know, we're not consuming high amylose wheat, are we? And just looking at what happened there, that the scientists there, the CSIRO, which is the USDA equivalent, licensed that trait to a milling company here in the US. Well, great. The milling company now can have access to that genetics and market that genetics in a food product. But is that really the right way to get something that has really good value to our diet into our diet? I'm not sure that is. I think the methods that are being adopted here by the coalition, like we've said already, are much broader than that. We can't just push this stuff onto the grocery shelves. Somebody has to help pull it through. And I think that's going to be a community like this, that's sitting at these tables. Catherine and I can do all we can, you know, to breed this stuff up, but you know, it's not going to go anywhere unless there's somebody else to help bring it through the system. Right.
There's somebody on the stage.
Can you hear us? I think Steve Greenspan has something to say.
Yes, several. The question of how the coalition was formed.
I'm sorry, Zoom, we can't hear you again. Technical difficulties.
Okay.
Would you be able to type that in the chat? We would love to read it for you.
Thank you.
I could hear you, Steve.
Does anyone else want to share while we wait for that response? Thank you.
I just have some questions, I think, for our breeders and researchers about, so we talk about fiber, and as from my surgical practice, our understanding of fiber as far as colon cancer is concerned originally came from studies in Africa and the high fiber diets there and the low incidence of GI diseases and things. So there is literature now that questions whether the impact of that was actually the fiber or all the nutrients that go along with the foods that contain fiber. So from the scientific standpoint, or from the physician community and gaining acceptance of the new fiber in the wheat, are the studies that we're presenting here about showing the benefits of increased fiber based on what kind of a diet? Is it the vegetable diets, the high leafy green diets, or is it the fiber from the wheat that we're talking about? Is it strictly fiber? And are we going to get the same benefit from, I'm just asking these questions that may come up that need to be answered at some point to the the scientific community or the physician community. So do you know the fiber studies here, are they talking about straight fiber? And I guess my question also, the fiber that we're seeing in the improved wheat, is that, what kind of fiber is that, as far as, do we gain the same extra nutrients that you might find in other fiber foods by pushing this into, I guess, the endosperm, is that right? Yeah. So question, any thoughts?
I think the clinical studies are really lacking. And I didn't really realize that until just recently. I'm working with a nutritional scientist at Oklahoma State University, wanting to answer the very simple question, okay, does consumption of foods, wheat foods, that may have elevated amylose, does that really result in a reduction in glucose spike? Just simple clinical study. And yes, there's a couple out there, but I'm just amazed that there really hasn't been an overpowering message that comes from that. But that's a very basic question I think we need to answer. Even for this coalition, we have to answer that. Will the consumption of this high in ribinosyl flour really make a difference? I think we kind of assume it will, but I don't think there's overpowering evidence. I think we need that. Thus, we need other researchers. Good question.
I'll just say that, so we submitted our grant proposal last year, and our reviewers, and this is in a plant breeding program area, they asked that question and said, well, why should we fund you? Will you really have an impact? And we're like, how will I know if we have an impact if I don't do it? So that is kind of where we're at on the breeding side. Also, this is maybe something that we didn't share today that is a very important message for you all. It takes us a long time to do this. It's usually about 10 years to go from a cross to a release variety. Sometimes we can go faster, but it's a long time. We have to do multiple years of testing. So for us to deploy high fiber wheat when you want it, we have to start now. And so that's just another really important message that we I should have shared in the talk this morning, that I'm so used to it, but I forget I'm talking to a little bit of a new audience here. Just remember that plant breeding takes a long time. So we do need a head start on all of this. We absolutely can do this. We do have varieties that are high fiber. I have no doubt in my mind that we will succeed here. We can do it. We just need time. I don't know, Edward, if you have any comments on kind of the studies that.
See, I think one important thing to point out here is that when you say high fiber, we're only increasing the fiber amount a small amount. So in order to detect an effect in a human clinical trial, you need a lot of people. That's a lot of money. So it's very hard to do those studies to actually determine whether it would have a benefit, and you need to be able to grow it. And it's a long ways from now. So that's why we're relying on starting with in vitro and animal models to be able to reduce the cost to get a better idea. I can say from the vast amount of research that has been done on dietary fibers, whole grains, it is very likely, based off of all that research, that it will have a benefit when you think of the population. Now, individual, it might not be enough, depending on their diet, to actually, reduce the risk of disease, but population-wise, based off the evidence out there, it would. But really, in order to test that it will have an effect, we need to be able to grow it. We need to be able to run the large clinical trials in large populations in order to detect that effect. Because again, the amount of fiber that we're increasing it's very small. Now, maybe we can get a couple grams per serving, but even if we get less than that, when you think of the amount that we're consuming in the population, how much fiber we're actually consuming just from refined wheat as it is, if we can bump that up just a little bit and look at the total amount that we're consuming as a population, we can have a benefit, at least what the current state of knowledge is right now.
I just want to follow up that I'm not in any way criticizing that we should be moving ahead, because some of these answers do rely ultimately on large population studies to try to figure that out, which are very difficult to interpret because of all the potential other issues that could be having impact. But you have to start someplace. So I'm just raising these questions that I think that nutrition is so difficult, because a lot of time we come up with concepts that we think are going to work. And then when we follow through on the larger populations, we find out, oh, that wasn't quite right. And that creates hesitation within the population to say, you guys don't know what you're talking about anyway. So it's just a difficult problem. It doesn't mean that shouldn't prevent us from moving ahead and trying all the time. So I'm not trying to be negative here, but I'm just raising some questions that I think that hopefully in the long run will be helpful as we approach this whole problem.
Any other comments? These are great discussions that we're having. And we're going to move on to the next slide.
Okay, thank you. When I first became a part of this group, one of the concerns I had was when you're talking about doubling the fiber is the functional properties of wheat. And Rod did tell me it does not affect the functional properties. And we also had a discussion about where to put the wheat, because most of us are not baking bread anymore. It's going to be in cereal grains. So what are we going to do? We would like for us to now, as a group, think about what we're going to do moving forward. This is really kind of divided into two components for us for the nutrition side. There's the Nebraska side, and then there is the historically Black colleges and universities. In Nebraska, we're looking at urban and rural communities, including long-term resident and as well as recent immigrants, because we know those diets are going to be different. Even within groups, we have to consider that people are not a monolith. All of us are different. All of us different for different ethnic reasons. We consume different foods. So how do we work with those groups? The last one, we're also working on, the one on the Zoom is hopefully Delaware State University. The other group that's with us is Southern University in Baton Rouge. They are HBCUs. Those are 1890 partners. They will hopefully be joining us in next year, October, November. So at this point, we would like to think about funding opportunities for you to have a discussion on moving forward with these communities. What is it that we think we should do? So can we have that discussion, and we'll come back to you in a few minutes.
Thank you, Georgia. If you wanted to just share out any thoughts that you have, you're welcome to. I don't think we need to break for discussion. But as we were thinking about next step is, how do we survey the community that we serve right now, and how can we learn from them? And that's what we wrote down here. We came up with a couple examples of maybe doing focus groups, maybe doing surveys, sending people to the community that we call them cultural brokers, those that people trust. So how can we learn from them to think about these next steps when it comes to not just nutrition education, but health in general? And if you can see yourself fitting into these steps, as well as funding opportunities, if you have ideas how to reach those and stakeholders, we'd be happy to hear those ideas. And as you're thinking about that, we want to answer these main 3 questions that we posed at the beginning of the day today of what do you see as the 2 biggest gaps in health messaging relating to grain fiber? What perceptions about grain fiber, food experience, and health do you feel need to be prioritized? And then listing approaches to reach underserved communities. I was writing down kind of the main areas and topics that came up in this session is obviously there needs to be more research on this, understanding fiber in general and the specific fiber and how that affects a human body. And in the medical world, how do we educate young children in a language that they understand and that can touch them? And then how do we tackle this social media space with influencers, right? Those are kind of the 3 priorities that I wrote down. Please scan the QR code on your tables and share anything on additional to these 3 that I just read. And then we will actually share these out with our larger group today at the end of the day. So this does conclude this breakout session. We're gonna hang around for 15, 20 more minutes since we have a little bit of a wiggle room. So you're welcome to speak up. I would be happy to read any comments in the Zoom space as well. But we thank you so much for being a part of this. And we're excited to hear those next steps and how we can all work together to reach them. Thank you. I do not think so. I think we're all back in the, actually, are we? No, yes. That sounds like Dr. Lyford is going to be in this room. But it's, yeah, so 3:45. I believe there is a gap. The session that was scheduled for 3:25, I believe that person's not going to be able to attend. So that gives us either more conversation, more room for conversation, or just a break. Yeah. That's what I was, okay, 3:25. All right. Yeah, don't go anywhere. 3:25 is going to be the next session, but you're welcome to share anything or take a break. Totally up to you. Okay, I'll just read a Zoom response before we, yeah. Okay, Steve Greenspan, thank you. The coalition was formed several years ago when we began to examine why food innovation was not leading to increasing nutrition at scale. We interviewed many people, which led us to the UK research. What we found was that the producers were often not talking with scientists, and we saw indications that innovations of this sort would require coordination across the supply chain and academia happening all at once, hence cross-disciplinary conference of this sort. Thank you for that explanation, Steve.